Mercy was always presented to Anastasia Darkhollow as a legal principle, something carved into stone lintels and recited before witnesses, but in practice, it moved like smoke. It gathered where power wanted it and vanished where power found inconvenience. By the time the tribunal bells stopped ringing over Darkhollow Hall, she understood the true law with painful clarity. Innocence could be argued, documented, sworn before moon and blood, and still be discarded if enough people needed a culprit by sundown. She stood in the center of the lower court ring while rain hammered the slate roof, one hand pressed to the underside of her belly, the other hanging numb at her side where the brand had just been set. Oathbreaker. The mark glowed raw and angry above her wrist, a crescent split by a vertical line, the old sign for wolf who betrayed den and border. Heat still pulsed through her arm in hard waves. Her ankles had swollen through her boots before dawn, her back ached from too many nights without proper sleep, and every breath seemed to scrape over the thin thread of control she had left. Counsel Elder Marrow did not look at her when he read the sentence. He watched the packed benches instead, projecting righteousness like a priest reciting weather. Anastasia Darkhollow, daughter of no declared sire, bonded to no recognized mate, is found guilty of guiding raiders through the East Pines. She is stripped of den right, table right, and claim right. She is to leave our boundaries before moonrise. No escort, no shelter, no appeal. Murmurs rolled through the crowd, pleased and hungry. Someone laughed softly. Anastasia swallowed and tasted ash. "You have no witness who saw me with them." A younger counselor gave her a brittle smile. "We have letters. Letters with blood seals that are not mine. Convenient defense." Her voice shook once, then steadied. "Check the archive wax." The date stamps were layered. The hall quieted just enough for Seraphina Frostborn, seated among visiting nobles in silver-trimmed black, to tilt her head and speak as if offering kindness. "You mistake stubbornness for dignity. Accept judgment, and you may keep what little grace remains." Anastasia met her gaze and saw polished pity, the kind used as a blade. No surprise lived there, only satisfaction measured and controlled. The elder struck his staff. "Remove her." Two wardens stepped in. They did not drag her, not with so many witnesses to impress, but each took an elbow hard enough to bruise and marched her through the side passage where condemned wolves were usually processed. The corridor smelled of wet wool, oil, and old fear. At the final gate, one warden thrust a wrapped bundle into her hands, a torn cloak, half a loaf, a skin with shallow water. Not enough for distance. Enough to satisfy procedure. "You got what traitors get," he said. The second warden glanced at her belly and looked away quickly. "Keep to the road until the boundary stones. After that, not our concern." Anastasia's laugh came out small and cracked. "You made sure of that." When the outer gate opened, rain slapped her face like a waking hand. She stepped into it because there was nowhere else to go. By late afternoon, the storm had thinned to mist, and she had made it 3 ridgelines south along the border road. Mud clung to her boots in heavy collars. Pine needles slicked the ruts. Her brand throbbed with each heartbeat, and fever had started a low shimmer behind her eyes. She kept counting breaths to stay upright. 4 in, 4 out. Again, again. This is what exile feels like, she thought. No wolves at your flanks, no doors with your scent in the grain, no one to say your name without contempt. The child shifted low and slow, a pressure that tightened her throat with sudden, helpless tenderness. She braced a hand against a boundary marker carved with Darkhollow's crest and waited for the wave of dizziness to pass. "I am still here. We are still here." One step, then one more. Hoofbeats reached her first, blurred by distance then sharpened into rhythm. Too many for a patrol. She moved off the center track and into the line of scrub junipers. The column came around the bend in broken formation, men in travel leathers without house colors on their sleeves. Not border guard, not random bandits either. Their seat in the saddle was military, disciplined. Then the lead rider shifted and a folded banner on his pack snapped open in the crosswind. Black field, white hooked moon, 3 diagonal slashes in red thread. Ravenclaw. Her lungs forgot how to work. Dark Hollow had accused her of luring raiders into their pines. Ravenclaw was the rival den named in every testimony. The same day she was cast out, Ravenclaw riders were already on the border road, hunting fast and quiet, without heralds, without formal challenge. Not panic then, not chaos. Planned. One of the riders spotted movement and pointed. There, off the marker stone. Another voice answered, rough with excitement. Take her alive. The world narrowed to instinct. Anastasia dropped behind the junipers, slid down the embankment, and hit the creek bed hard on one knee. Pain flashed up her thigh. She bit down on a cry, tasted copper, and pushed herself forward through cattails and wet stones, while shouts cracked above her. She cannot outrun horses. Cut south and box the ravine. She is worth more breathing. Worth. The word broke something quiet and old in her. Not woman, not witness, not person. Currency. Branches lashed her face as she climbed the opposite bank. Her lungs burned, her belly pulled with each stride, a warning ache that forced her to shorten her pace. She could hear tack jingling now, close enough to count straps, and dogs somewhere farther back catching scent. At the top of the bank, she stumbled into open ground and froze. A second force had already taken the high road. War wagons stood wheel-locked across the pass. Spearmen formed 2 clean lines around them. Cloaks the color of winter smoke hung over plated shoulders marked with the frostborn crest. A silver wolf's head ringed in runes. No scrambling, no shouted confusion. They held the road like a wall that had decided to breathe. At their center sat a man on a dark stallion, bareheaded in the mist, hair black with a streak of iron at the temple. He watched the tree line where Ravenclaw riders emerged, his profile still as carved basalt. Power rolled off him with an unnerving calm, not loud, not theatrical, simply undeniable, like pressure before an avalanche. Nikolai Frostborn, she realized with a surge of dread. Alpha King of the Northern Holdings. The Wolf Mothers in Dark Hollow had used his name to quiet children and embarrass cowards in equal measure. Ravenclaw's lead rider hauled his horse short and lifted both palms. Envoys under safe claim. Nikolai did not move. You cross my line armed. On sanctioned retrieval. The envoy nodded toward Anastasia without looking at her. The woman is condemned by her own tribunal. Return her, and Ravenclaw commits 4 battalions to your spring campaign, immediate deployment, full supply chain. Silence widened across the pass. Even the horses seemed to wait. One of Nikolai's commanders leaned close to him, speaking low. Anastasia caught only fragments. Strategic advantage, east front, council pressure. Her knees trembled from exhaustion. She forced herself upright anyway, mud streaked to her calves, cloak hanging in wet shreds. If he traded her now, there would be witnesses enough to call it lawful. Nikolai finally turned his head and looked at her directly. No hunger in that gaze, no pity either. Assessment, sharp and swift, taking in brand, mud, fever, pregnancy, and fear without pretending not to see any of it. Then he looked back to the envoy. You offer me soldiers for a surrendered exile. The envoy smiled, relieved. A practical exchange. Practical, Nikolai repeated as if testing a sour taste. He raised 2 fingers. Frostborn soldiers moved at once, not toward Anastasia, but toward the Ravenclaw banner poles lashed behind the envoy's saddles. Knives flashed, cloth ripped. White hooked moons fell into the mud in long torn strips. No one was struck. No blood spilled. Just the sound of fabric tearing through wet air. final as a verdict. Nikolai's voice carried across the pass, low and lethal. Take your men back to camp. Carry your flags as you found them. Tell your pack your bargain was heard and refused. The envoy's face drained of color. You would reject an army for her. I reject any court that mistakes a woman for payment. His gaze did not leave the envoy. Go, before I reconsider the courtesy. Ravenclaw riders hesitated, anger and calculation warring openly. Then they wheeled as one and withdrew down the slope, torn standards trailing from their saddles like wounded wings. Anastasia stayed where she was, soaked to the bone, shaking so hard she could hear her own teeth click. She had run because the road behind her promised capture. She had survived the pass because a king she did not trust had drawn a line she did not understand. Nikolai dismounted and handed his reins to a guard. He approached her slowly, empty hands visible, boots quiet in the mud. You are burning with fever, he said. She tried for defiance and found only honesty. You still might decide I am useful to someone. A shadow of something crossed his face, brief and unreadable. Not as currency. He stopped a respectful distance away, rain beating on his shoulders, and gestured toward the waiting wagons. Come to Frostborn Keep, he said. Stand, recover, and speak when you choose. No one touches you without your consent under my roof. The mist thickened around them, softening the scarred road, the torn banners, the boundary stones that had failed her. Anastasia pressed her palm to her belly and listened to the violent rhythm of her heart trying to become steady again. Then, because the only other direction led back to Hunters, she nodded once and stepped toward the king who had just refused an army. She nodded once and stepped toward the king who had just refused an army, and the movement nearly folded her in half. Nikolai caught the shift in her balance before she fell. He did not grab. He lifted one hand, palm open, waiting. The restraint struck her harder than force would have. Men who thought they owned outcomes did not wait for permission from condemned women. May I? He asked. Anastasia hated that her voice came thin. If you keep me on my feet. Yes. His hand settled lightly at her elbow, steady and warm through soaked fabric, and he turned with her toward the Frostborn wagons. Around them, his soldiers tightened formation with efficient silence, pikes angling outward as scouts peeled off to shadow Ravenclaw's retreat. No one cheered. No one muttered loud enough to be heard. Still, she felt the weight of 100 measuring glances sliding over the brand on her wrist, the curve of her belly, the mud from a road she had not chosen. A gray-bearded captain moved in from the left, scar across his chin, voice pitched for command without spectacle. My king, rear ridge is clear. 2 riders requested pursuit authorization. Denied, Nikolai said. I gave them a border in words. We keep both. The captain's gaze cut to Anastasia, then back. And her status? Nikolai did not hesitate. Guest under crown protection. The captain dipped his head once, accepting the order even if not the implication. Understood. Guest. The word landed strangely, too soft for what she was and too dangerous to trust. They reached the nearest supply wagon. Iron-rimmed wheels sunk deep in wet earth. A healer with cropped dark hair climbed down, satchel banging against her hip, and stopped just short of Anastasia with deliberate care. I am Talia, she said. I can treat the fever now, or at the keep. Your choice. Anastasia blinked hard against the haze behind her eyes. Choice again. She almost laughed at the absurdity of finding consent in a military roadblock. At the keep, she managed. If I can make it. You can, Nikolai said, not as comfort, but as decision. He helped her up into the wagon bench. She kept one hand over her belly and the other braced against rough timber while the column reformed around them. When the wheels finally lurched forward, pain traveled from her knee to her spine in a bright line. She bit down and stared ahead. The road into Frostborn territory climbed quickly, trading marshy ruts for stone-cut switchbacks and black pines that grew taller, older, closer together, as if the mountain itself had closed ranks. War towers appeared in intervals along the ridge, each crowned with a silver brazier hooded against rain. Wolves moved between the trees, massive shadows pacing the column without sound, their coats dark as storm water, their eyes watchful but not wild. Guardians, not hunters. By the time twilight pressed Violet across the upper slopes, the fever had settled deeper under her skin. Every jolt of the wagon threatened to shake her apart. She counted breaths and landmarks to stay present. A split boulder shaped like an anvil, a fallen cedar stripped white, a gate chain thick as her forearm looped around two standing stones, carved in runes she could not read. When they passed the final rise, Frostborn Keep revealed itself all at once. It was less palace than mountain made intentional. Bastions rose directly out of black granite, banded with iron and etched with old ward lines that caught the dying light in dull silver seams. High windows burned amber behind horn panes. 3 inner walls climbed in staggered tiers, each with its own gatehouse, each gate flanked by carved wolves larger than horses, jaws parted in warning. Above everything, a central tower pierced low cloud, and from its crown hung the Frostborn standard, heavy with rain but unbowed. Anastasia stared until her vision doubled. You live in a fortress built to survive the end of the world. Nikolai rode beside the wagon now, close enough that she could hear the creak of leather when he shifted. That was the original design brief. It took her a second to register the dry edge in his tone, and a breath of startled humor escaped her before pain reclaimed the space. His mouth moved, almost a smile, then stilled when she pressed a hand harder to her side. The outer gate lifted as they approached. Inside, the main courtyard churned with controlled motion. Smiths extinguishing forges, handlers leading battle wolves to covered runs, pages carrying ledgers between barracks and hall. Conversation thinned as the column entered. Heads turned. Anastasia felt recognition ripple outward, not of her name, but of circumstance. Branded woman, pregnant, in the king's convoy. A tall woman in court black waited at the base of the inner stair, silver torque at her throat marking rank. Her expression was perfect, meaning it hid too much. Your return is earlier than expected, she said to Nikolai. And complicated? Serafina, he answered, flat as winter stone. The name struck like cold water. Anastasia's attention sharpened despite exhaustion. Serafina Frostborn stood with one hand lightly resting on the railing, posture composed, gaze moving over Anastasia with polished concern that did not reach her eyes. You are injured, Serafina said. How unfortunate. We will arrange discreet quarters until council can assess her implications. Nikolai's response was immediate. Infirmary, full watch, no council contact. Serafina tilted her head. Without inquiry, rumors will multiply. Let them multiply outside my medical wing. For one stretched heartbeat, something raw and irritated flashed under Serafina's poise, then vanished. She smiled with all her teeth. As you wish, cousin. Anastasia climbed down from the wagon on unsteady legs. The world narrowed at the edges. She smelled wet wool, iron oil, wood smoke, and beneath it all the crisp mineral scent of mountain cold. Guards closed around them in a diamond formation as they crossed the courtyard. No one touched her, but every approach angle was sealed. Protection and containment, elegantly inseparable. At the infirmary doors, Talia pushed ahead to clear space. Warm water, clean linen. I need willow bark and moon moss now. Nikolai stopped just outside the threshold and looked at Anastasia rather than through her. Inside, you set the limits. If anyone crosses them, say my name. You assume I will use it? I assume you survive tonight. She stepped over the threshold and the room tilted, heat rushing up from stone hearths along the far wall. The infirmary smelled of herbs, boiled cloth, and old pine resin. Beds stood in 2 rows, mostly empty at this hour, privacy screens folded back. Talia guided Anastasia toward the nearest cot, and she sat because her knees gave her no dignified alternative. Voices blurred, hands moved at the edge of vision. Cloak cut away, bootlaces loosened, brand examined, fever measured. She answered questions when she could, nodded when she could not. Her body felt borrowed, too heavy and too fragile at once. Then the room changed. No door slammed. No alarm sounded. Still, every instinct in her sharpened at once, awareness prickling along her spine with such force she caught her breath. She looked up and found Nikolai entering the infirmary, rein gone from his shoulders, dark shirt open at the throat, forearms bared where old runes circled the muscle like pale fire scars. He stopped 3 strides from her bed. The distance vanished. Frost, steel, cedar. His scent hit her like a physical impact, clean and dangerous and achingly familiar in a way that made no sense. Heat pulsed beneath her skin, swift and consuming, as if each rib had become a bar around a blaze that refused containment. A low thrum built in her chest and answered from lower, deeper, where her child shifted with sudden force, one distinct pulse that rolled through her body like a second heartbeat not her own. Anastasia gripped the blanket until her fingers hurt. Desire and terror arrived in the same wave, indistinguishable at first, then terrible in their clarity. Mate. The word rose from old stories she had spent years dismissing as sentimental fiction told by wolves lucky enough to be chosen. No, not now. Not him. Not when every legal line in her life had just been burned away. Across from her, Nikolai's breath caught sharply. His pupils widened, then narrowed to predator focus as amber bled bright through his irises, unmistakable wolf light surfacing without permission. The healer nearest him stepped back, startled. "My king?" He did not answer. He took 1 step forward, then another, and dropped to one knee on the stone floor, as if driven there by something older than pride. The entire infirmary went silent. When he spoke, his voice came rough, reverent, almost broken on the first word. "Mine." The word cracked through her like thunder, and panic slammed into the heat. He closed his eyes once, hard, mastering himself in visible increments, then opened them and looked directly at her, not hiding the hunger, not surrendering to it either. "If she consents," he said, each syllable deliberate, "only if she consents." Talia stared between them, then signaled the other healers back with brisk efficiency that probably saved everyone from saying something foolish. Screens were drawn halfway, giving distance without abandoning witness. Anastasia could hear her own pulse in her ears. This was the crux she had never prepared for. The one male in 3 territories powerful enough to shield her was also the one fate had tied to her skin, her breath, her unborn child, with a bond she could not negotiate by treaty terms. Hope felt less like light and more like standing at the edge of a cliff and trusting air to behave like ground. She forced words past the knot in her throat. "You do not know me." "I know enough," he said quietly. "That is not the same." "No." His gaze never left hers. "It is not." For a suspended moment, the world outside that narrow space ceased to matter. Not Dark Hollow's sentence, not Ravenclaw's bargain, not Seraphina's polished smile in the courtyard. Only the locked line between his eyes and hers, the pull that said home and danger in the same breath. The child turning once and then settling as if listening. Inside Anastasia, a wall she had not known she built began to crumble, and she despised it for the timing. She wanted to lean toward him. She wanted to run until the mountains ended. She wanted, with humiliating intensity, to believe the restraint in his posture was real and not strategic. "I am not a prize," she whispered. His answer came without pause. I know. I am not safe because you desire me. You are safe because I gave my word. A beat. The desire is the complication. The corner of her mouth twitched despite herself, a frayed, disbelieving ghost of a smile. That may be the first honest thing said to me in days. Something eased in his expression, not triumph, not possession, only recognition that she had thrown him a thread and he would not yank it. He rose slowly from his knee, every movement controlled, and stopped farther back than before, giving her room to breathe. Outside, a bell rang once for evening watch. Inside, the fire snapped in the hearth, ordinary and steady, while the bond between them burned bright and newly named, waiting to see what they would do with it. The fire snapped again, and the ordinary sound steadied Anastasia more than any oath could have. Talia returned to her side with a bowl of steeped willow bark and a folded cloth. You need this down, she said, voice practical and kind in equal measure. Then sleep, if sleep will have you. Anastasia kept her gaze on Nikolai, still standing where he had retreated, giving her space he had every social right to erase. You can stay, she said at last, the words rough from fear and fever. At the door. His chin dipped once. At the door. He took exactly that position, broad shoulders framed by lamplight, hands clasped behind his back, as if he stood guard over a boarder rather than a woman in a healer's cot. Talia helped Anastasia drink, checked the brand, pressed salve into angry skin, and wrapped her arm in clean linen. When tremors hit, starting in her calves and shivering upward until her teeth knocked together, Nikolai did not move toward the bed. He only said low and steady, "Breathe with me. 4 in, 4 out." She did, because the rhythm was easier than panic. By the time the first watch bell gave way to second, the infirmary had thinned to embers and quiet steps. Talia insisted on rest, then vanished behind screens to tend a soldier with a fractured hand. Anastasia drifted in and out of uneasy sleep, each dip dragging her into the same splintered dream. Tribunal stone slick with rain, laughter from dark benches, hounds closing from both sides of a road that kept narrowing. She woke hard on a gasp, hand flying to her belly, sweat cold under the blankets. For one disorienting second she did not know where she was. Then cedar and smoke and iron settled around her, and she saw Nikolai still at the door, exactly where she had left him in her memory. He crossed only when she lifted her hand. "Nightmare?" he asked. She nodded, humiliated by how quickly tears burned behind her eyes. "I am not usually this fragile. Fever makes liars of all of us." A brittle laugh escaped her. That sounded almost comforting. "I can attempt worse if you prefer." The corner of her mouth twitched, then stilled as another tremor rippled through her back. It hurt in a different place this time, sharp and hot across old tissue she had trained herself not to acknowledge. She shifted, flinched, and Talia was suddenly there again, pulling the blanket down with quick, efficient hands. The healer's expression hardened. These scars tore open. Anastasia turned her face to the wall. "Leave them." "No." The single word came from Nikolai, quiet and absolute. Not a command to her. A refusal to the injury. Talia pressed 2 fingers to Anastasia's wrist, counting pulse. "Fever tremors can do this. If we do not clean them now, you risk infection." She looked up at Nikolai. "I need hotter water." He was already moving. No orders barked to servants. No theatrical, kingly concern. He went himself, returned with steaming basins, set them beside the bed, and rolled his sleeves to the elbow. Runic scars ringed his forearms, pale against tan skin, old and controlled, like everything else about him. "Talia," he said, "show me your method." The healer studied him for a beat, then nodded and demonstrated with crisp precision. Rinse, tincture, pressure, salve, fresh linen. Gentle hands, she warned. Even clean pain can trigger labor if she fights you. His jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. She will not need to fight me. Talia moved aside, but remained within arm's reach. Anastasia stared at the wall stones and counted mortar lines. A king on one knee she could survive. A king tending wounds she had hidden for years was a different danger altogether. Nikolai sat at the edge of the cot, not touching her. Both hands rested in plain sight on his own thighs. "Anastasia," he said, "may I clean the first one?" She swallowed. "You are asking like I might say no." "You might." The answer unmade a tight knot behind her ribs. She gave a short, stiff nod. His touch, when it came, was steady as a surgeon and careful as a promise being tested. Warm water ran over torn scar tissue, stinging enough to pull a hiss from between her teeth. He paused instantly. "Too much pressure?" "No. Continue." He did, methodically, with the patience of a man who had spent years mastering force and had chosen precision instead. No possessive comments, no mate claims, no attempts to turn vulnerability into leverage. The silence between them grew less jagged, then almost bearable. After the fourth dressing, he said, without looking up, "Whoever laid these did not fear witnesses." She shut her eyes. "You said you would not ask names." "I am not asking." He set down the cloth, reached for fresh linen. "I am telling you I saw." Heat pricked her eyes again, and she despised herself for it. Seeing and helping are not the same. "No," he said. "They are not." When the last bandage was tied, he leaned back and rinsed his hands. Talia checked Anastasia's pulse again, satisfied enough to leave them for a few minutes while she documented dosages at the central desk. The infirmary settled into low firelight and the soft scratch of a quill. Anastasia lay on her side, staring at the ceiling beams. "I have become a political disaster with swollen ankles." For the first time since the border pass, unmistakable humor touched Nikolai's face. "Then we are well matched, because I have always been a political disaster with a crown." The laugh that left her this time was real, brief, and startled, and almost painful in its unfamiliarity. "Do your counselors know you admit that?" "They have produced reports." That earned another small laugh, and with it, a breath she had been holding for days finally left her chest without hitching. He sobered, elbows on his knees, gaze on the hearth rather than her body. "You should know why I keep distance." She waited. "My father treated bonds as ownership," he said. "My mother died carrying his mark and calling it duty, because no one in his hall believed consent mattered after fate made a match. I buried her before my first shift." His voice remained even, but something feral and old moved beneath it. "I took this throne swearing I would not become him. Power without restraint rots everything it touches." Anastasia turned her head toward him slowly. The confession had cost him. She could hear the iron in the spaces between words. He met her gaze then, open and direct. "I want you. The bond wants you. Neither outranks your will." Present tense flooded her mind like cold water and clear air at once. He could take, and no one would stop him. He knows it. I know it. He is choosing not to. Not because I am useful, not because someone is watching, not for theater. Because he drew a line inside himself and intends to live there. I do not know if I can trust fate, or counsels, or marks carved into skin, but I understand discipline. I understand what it costs to hold still when every nerve says strike or run. I am tired of surviving men who call hunger loyalty. I am tired of bracing for harm and naming it normal. If this is a trap, it is a patient one, and I should stay guarded. Stay sharp. Stay careful. Yet when he says your will, something in me that has been clenched for years loosens one careful thread. "Thank you," she said, the words almost soundless. He inclined his head as if she had offered him rank. Sleep. I will be near if you call. He stood and returned to the door. 3 days passed before Anastasia could walk the infirmary corridor without gripping the wall. Talia declared the fever broken, the brand healing clean, and the reopened scars stable so long as she did not pretend she was made of iron. The child remained stubbornly steady, a reassurance she felt as deep, measured movement whenever anxiety threatened to spike. On the morning she managed stairs without stopping, a formal summons arrived from court, sealed in silver wax with the frost-born wolf. Talia read it, muttered under her breath, and handed it over. Welcoming inquiry, she said. That phrase always means knives in velvet. Nikolai came for her himself before noon, dressed in dark wool and leather, crown absent, authority somehow sharper without it. You are not required to answer anything today, he said as they crossed the inner yard. You may decline, defer, or walk out. I will enforce whichever you choose. She adjusted the plain blue mantle Talia had found for her, one hand unconsciously braced at the curve of her abdomen. If I refuse, they write the story without me. They will try regardless. Then let them do it to my face. A flicker of approval crossed his features. Very well. The great hall of Frostborn Keep was built for judgment and war in equal measure. Black stone columns carved with battle oaths, high clear-story windows turning noon light into pale blades, a dais at the far end beneath the hanging standard. Nobles lined both sides in layered silks and furs, silver torquays, polished contempt. At the center, on a chair set slightly lower than the king's seat, sat Seraphina Frostborn in mourning black, trimmed with moon thread, posture composed, expression almost tender. Anastasia Darkhollow, Seraphina said, as if greeting a guest to tea. We are grateful for your recovery. This inquiry exists only to ease concerns among the houses. The lie was elegant enough to earn several approving nods. Nikolai did not take the high seat. Instead, he stepped down from the dais and came to stand half a pace behind Anastasia's right shoulder, close enough that she could feel the heat of him, far enough that she remained visibly unshielded, unmistakably her own person before the room. Seraphina's smile thinned by one fraction. A gray-robed counselor rose with a scroll. State your lineage for record. Anastasia of Darkhollow, she answered. Daughter of Eleni Darkhollow, no declared sire. Convenient. A woman in emerald silk leaned forward, fan snapping shut. And the child you carry, conceived before or after your alleged cooperation with Ravenclaw scouts? A ripple of low laughter moved through the benches. Anastasia held the noblewoman's gaze. Conceived in my former pack. Wanted. Protected. Protected by whom? Another lord drawled, when no male has acknowledged it. Or shall we say it plainly and call the babe what it is? The word bastard hit the hall like a thrown stone. Nikolai moved. No claw, no roar, no theatrics. He simply let power off the leash. It rolled out from him in a cold, crushing wave that pressed the air flat. Candles guttered. Crystal chimed. Every noble who had smirked a heartbeat ago dropped to one knee with gasps and startled curses, hands braced on polished stone as if the mountain itself had settled on their shoulders. Even the gray-robed counselor staggered, scroll slipping from numb fingers. Nikolai's voice carried through the pressure, calm and edged like drawn steel. Any insult against Anastasia Darkhollow, or against the child under my protection, is entered as insult against the Frostborn throne. He turned his head toward the scribe's table without reducing the force pinning the room. Record that. Quill scratched frantically. Seraphina alone remained seated, face bloodless but controlled, knuckles white where her fingers gripped the chair arms. Nikolai continued. From this hour, accusations against her require formal petition and trial standard proof. No gossip entered as evidence, no anonymous testimony, no private questioning. Violation is contempt of crown law. He looked directly at the emerald silk woman still kneeling and shaking. Do you understand? Yes, my king, she whispered. He withdrew the aura in measured increments. The room inhaled as one, ragged and humiliated. Nobles rose slowly, eyes lowered, the earlier hunger gone. In its place stood calculation and fear, and beneath both, reluctant respect for a legal line none of them could now pretend not to see. Anastasia felt the shock of it in her bones. He had not merely defended her with threat, he had given her standing, voice, procedure, time. Serafina recovered first, folding her hands in her lap. A generous standard, she said, each word dipped in honey and acid. One hopes it will not be abused. Nikolai met her gaze without blinking. That concern applies to everyone in this hall. The inquiry ended within minutes, not because questions were answered, but because the structure had shifted and everyone present understood it. As nobles filed out, they bowed to Anastasia, some shallow, some resentful, none daring to omit it. The counselor who had demanded lineage paused long enough to murmur, "Lady Anastasia," before retreating like a chastened student. When the doors finally closed, silence flooded back into the hall. Anastasia realized her hands were trembling. She hated that the tremor looked like weakness and loved that she no longer had to hide it. Nikolai stepped beside her, close but not crowding. "You are pale." "I am angry," she said, "and tired and—" She searched for the right word, and found one that frightened her less than hope. Relieved. His expression softened, not triumph, not possession, only fierce attention. "You did well." She looked up at him, at the man who had knelt in an infirmary and stood like judgment in a court, and let herself believe one careful inch further than she had yesterday. "I might," she said slowly, "start using your name when I need help." A quiet, almost disbelieving warmth entered his eyes. "Then I will answer every time." Together they turned toward the side doors, toward light from the inner courtyard, and Anastasia did not flinch when he matched his pace to hers. They had reached the threshold when Serafina's voice followed them, velvet over wire. "One procedural matter, cousin." Nikolai stopped without releasing the measured calm that had emptied the hall. "Say it." Serafina rose from her chair and descended the dais steps with unhurried grace, mourning black skirts whispering over stone. Up close, she was beautiful in the way forged blades were beautiful, polished until they reflected only what they wished to show. Her gaze settled on Anastasia's bandaged wrist, then on the curve of her belly, and a sympathetic expression arranged itself with meticulous care. "The houses will demand a full moon oath in the moon temple," she said. "Not for punishment, for legitimacy. If Lady Anastasia is to stand under Frostborn protection, let moonlight settle doubt." Anastasia felt Nikolai's attention sharpen beside her. "The law does not require a temple oath for sanctuary." "Ordinarily, no," Serafina replied. "These are not ordinary circumstances. Rival packs are already circulating accusations that you shelter a planted asset. If she refuses, they will call your protection a private indulgence. If she accepts, and the moon answers, they lose that argument at once." A primary trap inside a useful truth. Anastasia heard it and knew Nikolai heard it too. Serafina tilted her head toward Anastasia, lowering her voice into almost intimate concern. "You deserve public vindication. Surely you do not fear sacred scrutiny." Fear had never been her problem. Weaponized ritual was. Nikolai's jaw shifted once. "Temple protocol runs through my office now." "Of course," Serafina said, smiling as if conceding nothing. "I already drafted the witness rolls and incense inventory to spare your clerks the burden. I will send copies." There it was. Not suggestion, but occupation. She had moved pieces before asking permission. Anastasia met her eyes and found no uncertainty there, only hunger refined into strategy. Serafina did not need claws when she could make a room believe cruelty was procedure. She wanted the same thing she had always wanted. Anastasia understood with a cold, precise clarity. Not only Nikolai's hand, but the narrative that made her inevitable. Remove the outsider, restore the expected bride, call it order. "We will review your drafts," Anastasia said quietly, before Nikolai could answer for her. Serafina's brows lifted by a fraction, surprised that she had spoken into the formal space rather than shrinking behind him. "I am relieved to hear it." When Serafina walked away, several nobles peeled after her with deferential urgency, already reshaping their faces into whatever loyalty she preferred. Nikolai watched them go, expression unreadable. "She has been building this for years," he said, barely above a murmur. "Every steward in the temple owes her patronage. Half the legal clerks trained in her household." Anastasia exhaled slowly. "Then she never needed to prove I was guilty. She only needed to make certainty feel inconvenient." He turned to her fully. "I can cancel the oath outright." And hand her a story about a king shielding his new obsession from moon judgment. Anastasia shook her head. "No. We go. But not blind." By dusk, they were in the records chamber under the North Tower, where old treaties slept in locked cedar cases and scribes copied border law by lamplight. Nikolai dismissed everyone except his spy master, an older woman named Morel, with silver braids and a limp that made no sound. She laid 3 packets on the table, copied letters from Dark Hollow's tribunal archive, a Ravenclaw draft treaty intercepted at the East Ford, and a temple requisition slate bearing Serafina's seal. Morel's finger tapped the first packet. "The blood seals accusing you were made with pigmented binding oil, not arterial blood. Under moonglass, counterfeit stains black at the edges." She tapped the second. Ravenclaw's offer included battalion numbers and supply lanes that match Frostborn internal planning. Someone with court access fed them specifics. Then the third. Moon Temple requested ceremonial incense triple the usual volume, with 1 private amendment. Resin added from Serafina's personal stores for fragrance consistency. No one flagged it because she has managed winter rites for 6 years. Anastasia leaned over the slate. The amendment line was neat, legal, forgettable. That was the point. Nikolai's voice went quiet in the dangerous way she was learning to recognize. "What resin?" Morel met his gaze without flinching. "Not listed." Anastasia lifted the slate closer to the lamp and caught a faint, bitter trace rising from the writing itself, as if whoever had handled it carried the scent deep in fabric. Not pine, not cedar. A metallic sweetness with a bruised green undertone she remembered from hunting manuals no one believed she studied. Wolfsbane prepared for smoke. Her stomach tightened. If burned in a closed chamber, it can trigger spasms and disorientation. In a pregnant wolf, it can be read as weakness, impurity, divine refusal, whatever story suits the loudest witness. Nikolai looked from the slate to her face. "Can it be proven quickly?" "Yes, if we test the blend before ritual." Morel slid a small cloth-wrapped vial onto the table. "I pulled residue from the temple storeroom latch. I can have Talia analyzed by dawn." Physical evidence, Anastasia thought, and forced herself to breathe through the surge of fear. Evidence could still vanish, witnesses could still be bought. But the pieces were no longer vapor. After Morel left, silence settled between stacked ledgers and old parchment. Snowlight from the narrow windows had gone blue. The room smelled of wax, cedar, and the faint iron tang of ink. Nikolai braced both hands on the table, caging nothing, simply near her. "You should move to the inner keep tonight. 2 guards at your door, 1 in the room." "You are asking," she said. "I am asking." She studied him, the severe line of his mouth, the old restraint he wore like armor. The bond between them had stopped feeling like a storm and started feeling like a tide, persistent and inescapable, touching every edge of thought when he came close. A low thrum built in her chest again, not panic this time, but recognition threaded with caution so sharp it almost hurt. Present tense flooded her mind with fierce clarity. I want to lean into him, and that frightens me more than hatred ever did, because hatred is simple, and this is not. I am still the woman cast out in rain with a brand on her wrist. I am also the woman standing over documents that prove someone feared my voice enough to counterfeit blood and law. If I hide now, Serafina names it confession. If I stand, she tries to break me in public. I can feel the child shifting, steady, patient, as if reminding me that endurance is not passive. Endurance chooses where to plant its feet. I am tired of being moved like cargo between stronger hands. I will not be moved tonight. I stay where I can reach records, Talia, she said. Post your guards. Keep one of mine too. I trust Leora from your infirmary wing. Done. His gaze dropped to her mouth and returned to her eyes with disciplined precision. And if the bond pushes too hard, tell me. I will step back. Will you? Yes. It was not romantic, and it was more intimate than romance. She touched the edge of the treaty packet and let one careful truth leave her throat. Thank you. He answered with a small nod that acknowledged the weight of it. Try to sleep after you eat. The next day broke clear and viciously cold. Courtyards glittered with rime, and every corridor carried whispers faster than official decrees. Anastasia crossed 2 halls with Leora at her shoulder and heard 3 versions of herself before she reached the infirmary. Traitor, temptress, moon-marked fraud. By midday, a 4th had joined them. Chosen. Talia met her with narrowed eyes and a ceramic dish set over coals. She sprinkled Morel's residue into the heat, then stepped back as thin smoke curled upward. The scent turned bitter-sweet immediately, sharp enough to sting. Wolfsbane resin, Talia said. Concentrated. Not enough to kill in this amount, enough to destabilize anyone breathing it for long. Enough to create symptoms witnesses can reinterpret. Can you testify? I can. So can Morel, if the chamber allows us to speak. Pressure mounted by the hour. 2 minor houses petitioned to postpone the oath for maternal caution, transparent language for cowardice. Ravenclaw sent a formal message at second bell demanding confirmation of Anastasia's legal status before winter trade routes reopened. Even the kitchen staff carried tension like static. Doors shut softer, eyes lifted faster, everyone waiting for one wrong move to decide the season. By the second evening, Serafina made her own move in plain sight. She requested private audience in the West Gallery and arrived with no attendants, hands bare, face composed into vulnerable sincerity. I did not forge those tribunal letters, she began without preamble. I did what was necessary to protect Frostborn interests once the accusations existed. You are not the first woman sacrificed to stability. You could be the first to profit from accepting reality. Anastasia stood near a frost-rimmed window, Leora visible but distant by the door. And what reality is that? That Nikolai was pledged to me in all but formal vow. Serafina's voice remained smooth, though color rose high in her cheeks. I was raised for this throne. I learned every house debt, every border grievance, every priestly rite so he would never stand alone. Then you arrive carrying scandal and a child that is not his, and suddenly he rewrites law for your comfort. Not my comfort, Anastasia said. My rights. Serafina's smile fractured. Do not moralize to me. You think kindness is governance because you have never had to hold a kingdom together with predators circling every gate. Predators like Ravenclaw. A flicker, quick, real. Serafina recovered, but too late. You cannot prove collusion. Maybe not yet. You will never be accepted here, Serafina hissed, dropping the polished cadence at last. The best outcome available to you is graceful disappearance. Refuse, and the moon itself will judge what you are. She left before Anastasia answered, skirts cutting a hard line through torchlight. At moonrise, the moon temple bells began. The temple sat above the inner wall on a white stone terrace open to the sky, its circular chamber ringed by carved pillars and shallow braziers set at cardinal points. Wolves and humans alike crowded the ascending steps, house colors layered in winter cloaks, murmurs weaving into one restless current. Witnesses, as promised, too many faces for accident, exactly enough for theater. Nikolai offered Anastasia his arm at the threshold and waited until she chose to take it. Heat from his skin grounded her for 3 beats. Then she stepped into the circle under her own balance. Talia and Morel stood to the left near the scribes. Serafina stood opposite in ceremonial black, hands folded, expression sanctified. The first incense brazier was lit, then the second, then the third. By the fourth, Anastasia knew. The scent spread low and sweet at first, almost floral, then curdled into that bruised green bitterness she had smelled in Talia's test dish. Her throat tightened. A sharp cramp seized her lower back and released. Not labor, she told herself instantly. Reaction. Chemical. Manageable. The child shifted once, then settled into a steady rhythm beneath her palm. She lifted her voice toward the nearest scribe. Record contamination in the incense blend. Before the quill moved, Serafina stepped forward and raised both hands dramatically. Do not interrupt the oath with panic. The moon goddess rejects false claimants in many forms. A murmur rippled through the crowd, frightened and eager. Anastasia drew a slow breath and tasted poison threaded through sacred smoke. Talia, speak now. Talia opened her mouth, but a temple warden struck his staff on stone. Only officiants may address the circle once invocation begins. Nikolai's head snapped toward the warden. I did not authorize that restriction. Ancient protocol, Serafina said smoothly, not looking at him. For purity of rite. Stand down, Nikolai ordered. 2 wardens shifted to block his direct path into the inner ring, bound by temple law and very aware of the line they were crossing. Around them, more guards tensed, hands near weapons, unwilling to start bloodshed in a sacred chamber and equally unwilling to watch their king be contained. Another cramp hit, stronger. Anastasia bent, caught herself, and looked at the central brazier. Pale residue clung to the bronze lip like ash that refused to gray. This dynamic, she realized, was the true strike. Not merely toxin, but timing, witnesses, and procedural silence fused into one blade. Serafina's voice rose over the chamber. All present can see the sign. The outsider cannot stand under moon law. Nikolai moved anyway, temple ward or no temple ward, power gathering around him like incoming winter. The nearest pillar runes flared in warning. Guards shouted. Someone screamed from the upper steps. Anastasia straightened through the pain, eyes fixed on the brazier as smoke thickened between her and the moon opening overhead. If she waited for permission, Serafina owned the story. If she moved now, she could still seize the narrative before it hardened. She stepped into the center of the ring, reached through the poisoned haze and closed both bare hands around the burning bronze. Bronze seared her palms through skin and callus alike, a bright, punishing heat that should have forced her to drop it. Yet she held on and lifted the brazier clear of its stone cradle while the chamber shouted around her. Smoke poured upward in a choking ribbon, then bent as if caught in a crosswind no one else could feel. Her back spasmed once, hard enough to bow her, and she locked her knees, breathing through clenched teeth. Anastasia, put it down, Nikolai barked, already moving, temple warden scrambling out of his path as his authority snapped every ritual pretense in two. Serafina raised her voice above him, palms turned to the moon opening. Witness the blasphemy. She defiles sacred fire because truth burns her. Record her words, Anastasia said hoarsely to the scribes, forcing each syllable into the room, and record that she approved the resin amendment. The nearest scribe looked between Serafina and Nikolai, paralyzed by rank and survival. Ink dripped from his quill tip onto the ledger, dark and useless. A second wave of cramps knifed through Anastasia's lower abdomen. Not labor, she repeated to herself. Toxin. Talia told me this pattern. Talia told me how to break it. She shifted the brazier away from her body and slammed it onto the central altar slab. Coals burst, scattering sparks. Gasps rolled through the crowd on the steps. Talia! Nikolai thundered. Inside the ring, now! Temple wardens moved to block her healer again. Anastasia saw it, saw the trap reforming in real time, and something cold and decisive settled through her fear. She reached into the smoke with her unbandaged hand, caught a pinch of burning blend, and crushed it between her fingers. A bitter green flare hissed against her skin. The scent sharpened instantly, unmistakable now even to untrained noses. Wolfsbane resin, she shouted, in ceremonial-grade incense. Ask your wardens why they barred testimony. The crowd's murmurs shifted pitch. Less eager now, more uncertain. Serafina took one step toward her, expression carved in wounded righteousness. You are raving, Serafina said. You were unstable when you arrived, fevered and hunted. Now you invent poison because the moon rejects you. Nikolai reached Anastasia's side at last. One hand braced at her back without taking control, the other lifted toward the wardens. Kneel. Both of you. They dropped instantly, shaking. Talia crossed into the ring with Morel at her shoulder. The healer inhaled once near the altar and her face hardened. Contaminated, she said clearly. High concentration, I can testify under oath. Serafina rounded on her. You are a barracks medic, not a temple authority. I am the physician responsible for the woman you attempted to destabilize in public. The chamber erupted. Nobles on the upper tiers argued openly. Priests shouted about protocol, and two rival house guards drew steel half an inch before their captains shoved the blades back down. 3 children in novice gray at the front benches began to cry, pressed between adults suddenly more interested in accusation than safety. Then Serafina made her move. She clapped once, sharp as a whip crack. From behind the west pillars, 4 hired blades broke concealment in temple servant robes, short swords already bare, driving straight toward the central ring through witnesses who screamed and scattered. Their target was not Nikolai. Anastasia saw the angle, saw where the lead attacker's gaze fixed, and felt ice flood her veins, her belly. Down! She snapped at the children nearest the altar, voice carrying with authority she had not practiced and did not question. Under the bench, hands over your heads, do it now. They obeyed on instinct, dropping as steel flashed above them. Nikolai surged forward with a snarl that rattled the pillars, but Anastasia seized his forearm. Defensive crescent, she said, fierce and breathless. Guard line around civilians first, not pursuit. For a heartbeat he stared at her, amber burning in his eyes, then he turned and roared the order in pack command cadence. Frostborn guards pivoted in drilled precision, shields locking in a half-moon between the attackers and the crowded steps. The first blade struck iron instead of flesh. Anastasia stepped in front of the children anyway. The lead assailant lunged around a shield edge, sword tip low and vicious. She had never shifted fully, never answered taunts about being wolfless with anything but stubborn endurance. Yet under smoke and moon and terror, something ancient in her blood stood up and refused to stay buried. Heat tore through her joints, her nails lengthened into curved points. Her canines dropped with a pressure ache that became a sharp click. Strength flooded her limbs in a raw, unfamiliar rush. She caught the attacker's wrist in both hands and redirected the strike into the altar stone. Metal screamed. He tried to wrench free. She twisted and drove him to one knee, not killing, only breaking his leverage while a Frostborn guard disarmed and bound him. A second assailant came high. Anastasia ducked, shoved one child farther under cover with her hip, and drove her shoulder into his ribs hard enough to spin him into Morel's waiting cane. The spymaster hooked his ankle and sent him flat. Around them, moonlight thickened through the smoke as if the night itself had leaned down to witness. Present tense burned through Anastasia's mind with startling clarity. I am not waiting. I am not pleading. I am standing in the center where she wanted me to fall apart, and my body is changing under my own command, not hers. Pain is real. Fear is real. The child is steady. Breathe. Choose. Again. She built this room to turn me into a cautionary tale, a trembling outsider undone by sacred judgment. I can feel the old habit pulling at me, the one that says endure quietly and survive whatever comes. Not tonight. Tonight survival is loud. Tonight I name what she did while everyone is forced to listen. If I have power, it is this, to direct the next moment instead of being dragged by it. Hold the line, protect the small ones first, keep your feet, keep your voice, keep going. The remaining two hired blades faltered when the crescent formation closed, and Nikolai's aura hit them like a physical wall. He did not slaughter them. He stripped their will to advance. They dropped their weapons and raised empty hands, choking on panic. Bind them, he ordered. Alive. Seraphina stood near the east brazier, chest heaving, sanctity gone from her face. For the first time, Anastasia saw naked desperation there, bright and feral. Morel was already at the altar, turning the contaminated basin with a cloth-wrapped grip. From beneath its false bottom she pulled a folded parchment packet sealed in black wax. Hidden compartment, she called. Temple inventory code. Bring it to the scribe, Anastasia said, still braced between children and chaos. Read it aloud. The senior temple scribe, an old wolf with milk-white hair, took the packet with trembling hands and broke the seal. His eyes moved, widened, then narrowed as trained discipline overrode shock. This is a treaty draft in private cipher, he said. Signatory mark, House Frostborn, subseal Seraphina line, counterparty designation, Ravenclaw command. The chamber hushed by painful degrees. Read the exchange clause, Anastasia said. He swallowed and obeyed. In return for 4 battalions and seasonal supply, subject designated Anastasia Darkhollow will be surrendered at border post under Crown Transfer Authority. His voice shook on the next line. Language includes valuation terms and transfer timetable tied to tribunal outcome. A stunned silence followed, then scattered curses, then a full wave of outrage as the meaning settled in every rank. Seraphina's composure shattered. Forgery, she spat. Convenient theatrics stitched together by a frightened girl and a king thinking with instinct. Anastasia stepped toward her slowly, hands burned, breath ragged, partial shift still riding her bones like a storm not yet spent. You planted letters. You staged witnesses. You poisoned incense in a sacred chamber. I preserved this throne from contamination. You tried to buy it with me. Seraphina's hand moved like a striking snake, faster than court silk should allow. A narrow silver pin flashed from inside her sleeve, tip honed for puncture, trajectory aimed low and direct. No outsider heir takes Frostborn blood, Seraphina screamed, driving forward. Anastasia intercepted her wrist mid-thrust. Pain lanced through her scorched palms, but leverage and new strength held. She twisted outward, forced Seraphina's elbow high, and the pin clattered across stone. Seraphina fought with surprising force, nails raking for purchase, but Anastasia pivoted and pinned her face down against the altar edge, forearm locked across shoulder blades. Now, Anastasia shouted to the scribe, read the final line. The old wolf lifted the parchment again, voice ringing harder this time. Contingency note in author's hand. Quote, if surrender is resisted, induce temple failure and attribute maternal distress to divine censure. A collective intake of breath swept the terraces. Seraphina thrashed once, then went still, cheek pressed to cold stone. Her voice emerged raw and venomous. He was promised to me by birth and blood. Anastasia tightened her hold just enough to stop another struggle. A throne can be promised, a mate cannot. Nikolai stepped into the center ring. Every line of him controlled violence held on a short chain. He did not touch either woman until temple guards arrived on his signal. Then he took Seraphina's arm from Anastasia's grip and transferred it to iron restraints with ritual precision. Seraphina Frostborn, he said, voice carrying to the highest step, you are stripped of title, inheritance, command authority, and house protection effective now. All estates under your seal are seized by crown law pending restitution. Your confession will be bound under oath magic before witnesses. You are sentenced to permanent exile beyond the eastern straits under armed escort. Return voids your life right. Seraphina laughed once, a fractured sound. You would exile your own blood for her. I would exile any traitor for this kingdom. He turned to the temple marshal. Execute sentence at dawn. Until departure, isolation cell, no private visitors, no correspondence unsealed by crown scribes. The marshal struck fist to chest. By your word. As Seraphina was marched toward the lower gate, nobles flattened against pillars to avoid her passing. No one reached for her. No one claimed alliance. On the outer terrace, house attendants lowered her black and silver standards from their poles. At Nikolai's nod, they fed the cloth to the brazier flames one by one until only curling ash remained. Anastasia stood in the center of the chamber, knees shaking now that action had ended. Talia wrapped cool cloth around her burned hands while murmuring reassurances about the child's steady rhythm. The three novices she had ordered to the floor emerged from under the bench and stared up at her with wide, tear-streaked faces. She crouched carefully, despite the protest in her back. You listened fast, she told them softly. That saved you. One of the children, a girl with a split braid, nodded hard. You sounded like a commander. Anastasia almost smiled. I was trying to. When she rose, Nikolai was waiting a respectful step away, eyes still bright with wolf light and something far more vulnerable beneath it. Around them, scribes copied testimony at frantic speed, guards hauled away bound assailants, and the moon shone clean through air no longer poisoned. The story had been turned in public, by her hands, her voice, and choices no one could erase. Nikolai looked at the scorched skin across Anastasia's palms, then at the trembling in her shoulders she was still trying to hide, and asked, Can you stand a little longer? She understood what he meant before he said it, because the bond between them was no longer a pull at the edge of awareness. It was a current running straight through both of them, fierce, unfinished, asking for shape. Around the moonlit chamber, witnesses still crowded the terraces, but the noise had softened into a tense hush. Temple wardens had dragged away the hired blades. Scribes were stacking fresh sheets beside inkpots with shaking hands. Talia stood close enough to intervene if needed. Morel stood by the altar with the recovered packet and watched everything. Anastasia drew one slow breath. If this is done, it is done cleanly. No coercion, no confusion. Nikolai's gaze stayed on her face. Agreed. He stepped with her toward the moonwell at the center of the ring, where pale water reflected the open sky. Silver light pooled over black stone, over her burned hands, over the brand that had once named her disposable. When they stopped, he did not touch her. His voice carried clearly. Before witnesses and under moon law, I ask consent to claim Anastasia Darkhollow as my mate. He held her eyes. Do you consent? Her hands shook, but her answer did not. Yes. He nodded once, as if receiving command. I ask again, with no debt invoked and no crown privilege. Do you consent? Yes. He exhaled, rough and controlled. I ask a third time, with full right to refuse still yours. Do you consent? The bond surged so hard it almost hurt. She thought of rain on tribunal stone, of torn banners on mud, of his hands visible while she slept through fever and fear. Yes, I consent. Only then did he move. Nikolai knelt first and bowed his head, baring the side of his throat to her in front of every house that had ever measured power by domination. A murmur swept the chamber. Anastasia stared at the vulnerable line of skin above his collar and felt the significance of it settle in her bones. Trust offered, not demanded. My life before my claim, he said quietly, for her and for the room. Always. She touched his jaw with burned fingers, then nodded for him to rise. When he stood, he waited again. She tipped her head, exposing the junction of neck and shoulder, pulse unhidden. His hand came to the back of her neck, warm and steady, anchoring rather than restraining. Mine, he whispered, voice frayed by reverence. Yours, she answered, throat tight. Mate, he said. Mate. His bite landed with deliberate precision, sharp enough to spark white pain across her shoulder. She gasped and grabbed his forearm. The first beat burned. The second turned molten. By the third, pain had transformed into a spreading heat that raced down her spine and across her chest in luminous waves, as if locked doors inside her body were opening one by one. Silver gold light rippled under both their skin, visible even to the farthest witness. The child inside her shifted once, then settled into a calm, even rhythm that made tears sting her eyes. Nikolai pulled back the instant her body tensed too hard, giving space, searching her face. Anastasia, I am here, she managed, breathless. Do not stop. He brushed his forehead to hers for one heartbeat, then straightened, blood bright at his lip where her skin had marked him back. She slid her hand to the nape of his neck and drew him down. This time she chose the angle, the pressure, the claim. Her teeth sank into the side of his throat. Not savage, not timid, enough to seal vow into flesh. His breath broke on a low sound that was more surrender than triumph. Heat flared through the bond, then steadied into something vast and ordered. Not wildfire now, a joined pulse. She felt flashes from him in visceral fragments. Iron discipline, old grief at a graveside, the moment he saw her on the border road and decided no bargain would buy her body. He felt from her the years of careful silence, the lash of public shame, the stubborn will that had kept one step in front of the next when no one came. The mate thread locked fully, like a drawn bow finally released. They stayed forehead to forehead, both breathing hard, hands gripping each other as the light slowly dimmed to a soft sheen under skin. He whispered against her brow, words meant for no one else though the whole temple heard them. I see you, I choose you, I keep you. She answered, exact and steady. I see you, I choose you, I keep you. For several heartbeats, neither moved. Then Nikolai wrapped his arms around her with extraordinary care, mindful of her burns, her exhaustion, the child, and she let herself lean all the way in. Around them, wolves dropped to one knee, then humans followed, not to him alone, but to both of them standing in the moonwell's light. At dawn, the temple records, the treaty packet, and the contaminated incense basin sat on the great hall evidence table under guard, each tagged with waxed cords and scribe marks. No item vanished. No line was misplaced. Talia testified first, presenting her written analysis of wolfsbane resin from the storeroom latch sample and the brazier blend. Morel testified second, walking the court through cipher structure and chain of custody for the hidden draft. The senior scribe produced authenticated copies through Moonglass, where the forged blood seals from Dark Hollow blackened at their edges exactly as Anastasia had warned from the beginning. Council Elder Marrow's sealed statement arrived by courier before midday, terse and defensive, admitting procedural failure and withdrawing the Oathbreaker ruling in full. The loaded silence he had used as judgment never returned. His name would remain in the record beside the reversal. Ravenclaw's formal demand received its answer in open court. Their envoy stood beneath the gallery while Nikolai and Anastasia heard the terms together: withdrawal of all surrender claims, exchange of captured operatives, and winter border patrols restructured into mixed watches with independent scribes from neutral dens. When the envoy asked whether Frostborn intended retaliation for the attempted temple strike, Anastasia spoke before anyone else. Retaliation feeds martyrs. Documentation ends myths. You will carry certified copies of Seraphina's treaty draft and confession to every major den before first snowmelt. Fail, and trade routes close. The envoy swallowed and bowed. It will be done. By sunset, Seraphina's oath-bound confession had been witnessed, sealed, and entered into Interpack archive. She left through the east gate in irons, guarded to the straight ships with no house banners above her column. No dramatic last speech, no loyalists rallying in secret corridors. Just the hard sound of wheels over frozen ruts and the legal finality she had once weaponized against others. On the third night after the temple, the claiming ceremony filled Frostborn's lower courtyard. Torches ringed the stone, wolves lined the walls and terraces, their breath ghosting in cold air. Anastasia stood beside Nikolai in queen's leathers fitted for her changing body, shoulder mark visible, head high. The crown set on her was not decorative filigree, but a narrow circlet of dark silver etched with sanctuary law. When the herald named her Luna Queen and co-ruler by crown statute, the hall did not hesitate this time. Her first decree followed immediately. Any abandoned female or child crossing pack borders under duress is granted 3 nights protected refuge in Frostborn territory, extendable by healer petition and council review. No transfer, no barter, no forced return without trial proof. Talia's eyes shone openly at the words. Leora struck fist to chest. Morel gave one small, satisfied nod, as if a long calculation had finally balanced. Later, when ceremony ended and the pack's answering howl rolled across the mountain like thunder made warm, Anastasia stepped onto the moon terrace above the keep. Snowlight silvered the stone. Below, sentry fires traced the walls that no longer felt like a cage. Nikolai came to stand at her side, their fingers lacing without thought, the settled bond a steady hum rather than a storm. She set one hand over the child and lifted her face to the sky. Her howl rose clear and unbroken into the winter night. 1,000 voices answered from courtyard, wall, and forest edge, not as command obeyed but as belonging returned. Nikolai pressed a kiss to her marked shoulder and murmured, "Mine." She turned into him, smiling now without bracing for impact. "Yours, mate." And when the pack below called again, they answered together.